Have you ever felt boxed in by too many sewing rules, or perhaps you've hesitated to sew, worried you'd make a mistake? My Sewing with Nancy guest has cast sewing rules and mistakes aside. Please welcome Vicki Tracy, who is a master at adding embellishments to her sewing project. Welcome back, Vicki.
Nancy, thank you so much. It's great to be back. I always think that we don't really make sewing mistakes. We just create embellishment opportunities. So one of my favorite ways to embellish with trim is to seal the fabric. No detailed binding needed with this easy technique. Simply twist yarns and strands of trim and zigzag around the edge. It's my sealed edges technique.
Embellish outside the box. That's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy. Celebrating 30 years of sewing and quilting with Nancy Zieman is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effects threads because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing Designs and Class A Needles.
Vicki's sealed edge technique takes the place of binding and piping. And you can see from this handbag, really classic looking, that edge has ribbon trim, even a little extra surprise of trim stitched on the inside. You'll be able to combine some of the techniques from our first program of adding trim and buttons and little extra doodads, or even if you're upcycling a jacket, you could add it to a finished edge. This has as well a felting, but it also has the sealed edge, just a little extra, no, a lot of extra trim added along the edge. And Vicki, I think you really have found that this edge joining foot works perfectly well with this.
It does. It's perfectly designed for the project that we're doing.
The edge that you see down the middle gives you an opportunity to guide the fabric along one side of the foot, butt it up next to that bridge, and the trim will go on the other side. So the trim is your next description because there are many opportunities.
Well, and there are so many things that you may already have on hand. For instance, yards and yards of seam binding. You may have made some bias tubing. You may have yarns, and this is a perfect place for you to purchase yarns and hoard them because you're going to be using them in some way or another. Now, here's a really interesting trick. That is when you cut knit fabrics on the vertical lengthwise grain.
Not crosswise, but
no,
lengthwise.
Lengthwise, right, parallel to the selvage. When you pull them, they roll up into two little tubes. Now that would be perfect to twist in with some of these other yarns, or if you want it just like one tube, then cut those right down the center and you will have one tube almost like a little cord. Some of those minky fabrics that are real soft work well for that.
So you're not satisfied with one trim, you gotta put many together.
More is always better. Add something sparkly, something textury, something flat, and sometimes you have trims that you don't like. Twist them in with something else. This is a time when you do want to use monofilament threads because that will hide what you are doing. The monofilament threads come in two varieties. The pastels to whites would do better with the clear monofilament, and anything medium to dark would do better with the smoke monofilament. Now you can put that in your bobbin as well as the top. Mainly you want it in the top thread because what we're going to be doing, contrary to what a lot of people think that we're going to sew this on top, we are butting these two edges right together. So we have the fabric on one side with the raw edge abutted to the track, and we have the trim on the other side, and we are twisting. The zigzag stitch that you will be using will catch part of that trim. It doesn't have to catch much of that trim at all to be very well secure, because as you twist, you will find that it will take a bite of the trim and a bite of the fabric. So what it does is it takes care of that raw edge. There's no raw edge showing. Now, if you decide, like what Nancy said, to add the extra surprise on the inside, then that's just kind of a nice surprise. And you can also sandwich another trim on the top if you choose.
So you twist like 3 to 4 inches perhaps.
Right.
Then stitch, twist some more, stitch, and you made a good comment. Sometimes the wider trim overtakes
It does.
the other trims.
And so if it does that and you want something else to show more, then twist the other direction, because you don't have to keep twisting in the same direction.
While Vicki finishes adding that trim, I'd like to show you the inside of this bag. Because the bobbin thread was there and it was not clear, she just covered it by zigzagging over with clear thread again so that it had a nice finished edge. So you can seal the edge just by zigzagging, using trim, and a lot of creative touches. One of Vicki's favorite mantras is, buy retail, add detail. What was once a rather traditional looking jacket is now an embellished outside the box jacket. The collar features her clever cover-up method, created with zigzag stitches, extra fabric, and of course, trim. Vicki, you were just wearing this jacket in the model shot, but when we look at it, there's a lot going on, and we're going to talk about the collar. The rest will come later in this program, but this collar has a lot of fun.
It's very easy to cover a collar. You may want to rescue an old jacket, or you may want to add some pizzazz to a new one. But if you are buying retail, you don't have a collar piece exactly.
Oh, of course not.
So I love to do the lazy way of adding that extra fabric to a purchased collar.
And you're not limited to collars. It could be a cuff, it could be a yoke, some element within a garment.
The tab of these jackets would be perfect candidates. We want the piece on the collar specifically to be biased, because that's going to give it that roll and drape that we want. So the fabric was cut larger.
On a 45-degree angle, and you can see it's biased because it pulls now. And we're going to put this big piece over the collar, the right side of the collar. It's going to be a four-handed job here, effort to
Tag team.
And we're going to start at the center back. So let's kind of pin this fabric and just let it mold.
Exactly, because that's what bias does best. So we're going to make sure that it doesn't get away from us, but we're actually going to be stitching from the back side, because we're going to be tracing over the shape of the collar. So this doesn't call for any pre-tracing of some kind of collar piece. It's just going to give us a way of holding that fabric in place. Now we'll turn to the other side, and we are going to then stitch with a zigzag stitch, following the outside edge and the roll line and the bottom edge of this collar.
And here we have a sample that will show the steps in smaller detail, where this is a collar. Obviously, you'd have it attached to your jacket or to your shirt. And after zigzagging, then, you know, this is not rocket science. Just trim along that edge and keep trimming it along. And here this sample shows that it's been cut and nothing exacting yet. We just did sealed edges.
So we're going to do that here, because now we've created a raw edge.
Right.
So again, we take those trims and twist and butt them to the edge. You don't lay them over the top. You just put them right to the edge. That edge stitch foot is again going to be your very best friend. And maybe monofilament thread.
So then, here we have that covered collar. We have the trim that's been added, the sealed edges. And on the jacket, you saw this rickrack. Now, I would have never chosen rickrack of orange, but it looks great.
Well, it gives a nice pop of color, and that just proves the theory. If I sew it together, it goes together.
And this is just a sample of the processes: raw edge, sealed edge, and a cover-up underneath.
Sometimes when you're wearing your jacket, you want your collar to stand up, so you do want it to look pretty from both sides.
So here, when the finished collar is worn in the perky position and standing up, you have a cover-up that adds a wild look, but with class. Now, embellishing outside the box turns to computerized embroidery for artistic options. With Vicky's cavalier approach to embellishing, stitch out a collection of embroidery designs without committing to a project. Later, use the embroideries as appliques. It's a no-hassle approach to embellishment. Vicki, this sweater you embellished has the couching, it has the sealed edges, but now we're concentrating on the embroidery along the lower edge. And usually when I've done embroidery, I've stitched on the finished project.
And sometimes when you do that, some projects are a little hard to hoop. Sweaters would
Right.
stretch. And the other thing is sometimes the stitches would embed themselves into the grain or into the knit of the sweater. So to make these a little more dimensional, I stitched those on felt that had some cutaway stabilizer behind that. So it made them really stable and dimensional.
So you didn't see any of these stitches going through the sweater. This is not the frog design, but here's one of the embroideries that we're going to be working with, and it's been embroidered on felt, as Vicki mentioned, cut out, and then appliqued to the fabric, just stitched around the edge with a straight stitch. We'll show you that in a few minutes and how and why you do it, but let's look at these pants because these are really dramatic.
Well, one thing that's so easy to do when you're doing embroidery this way is that you can visually place and audition your
Right.
designs before you commit to that being stitched onto the garment. And the other thing that is, a denim has a twill weave, and if you were embroidering that directly onto the
Yes.
garment, it wouldn't have nearly the dimension it has when it is standing above the fabric.
So again, these have been stitched on a separate fabric, cut out, a fabric being non-ravelly, and then just straight stitched on. It really saves a lot of
Angst.
angst, exactly, well put. So to give you some hints about how to do this, it's a great way to get to know an embroidery collection because you can crowd as many of the designs as you'd like in one hoop. Now, we haven't crowded too many here yet, but we will continue to add more.
And use every bit of that stabilizer.
Just
and sometimes
nesting as many as you can.
Absolutely, and sometimes you don't know what you're going to do with the design collection. You need to stitch them out. You may want to
Right.
audition some colors that way.
This is 2 layers of cutaway, not tearaway stabilizer, and many embroidery designs have a black outline. Well, that just will be enhanced by just a little bit of that stabilizer left after you do the trimming. This particular combination had felt and a stabilizer and stitched in the entire design, just part of, or just the bloom or just the leaves. And we could have added a few more things in here too.
Now, because this had a white background, the white was showing around those leaves. So a really neat trick that professional embroiderers use is using some of those micro pins
Yes.
or the ones that are permanent and coloring that edge. And if you miss a stitch, that's another good trick.
Yes, don't hesitate to use those permanent markers. Now, as we look at a scarf that I had hanging in my closet that got a mark on it.
An embellishment opportunity.
Yeah, I wasn't going to wear it, but now I will.
Well, there are so many different things that you can do with this. You could add some ruffles to that. You could add some flowers. You could do some dimensional flowers. You can do some leaves. We could add some sparkle and glitz. We could add some buttons. But this is the perfect place to put an embroidery.
And then you would just tack, look at this bowl of goodness that you could just keep adding and adding just by tacking it down. Dimension is another idea, and the garment on the mannequin has dimension to the pansies kind of pop out a little bit more.
And the way that was done is the pansies were appliqued onto the front. Then on the back, You do a tiny incision, stuff it with fiber fill, and then close it up with a few hand stitches, and you have a dimensional detail that adds a very nice touch. And this collar was made from a pre-made table runner.
So whether you are working with a handbag, a jacket collar, denim, jeans, whatever you'd like to work with, stitch the embroidery first, cut it out as an applique, then add it as an embellishment for extra out-of-the-box effects. After you see this next embellishment idea, you'll be inclined to keep all scraps, all pieces of fabric, and all trim. Select morsels of these and sandwich them between stabilizers and stitch to create fabric potpourri. Use this newly created sheet of texture to adorn garments and accessories from head to toe. What you'll find with all of Vicky's garments and accessories is that one type of embellishment is never enough.
More is better.
And here we have the button collage from the first program combined with the fabric potpourri now, and it's just hand tacked on and a little embroidery too. So you're right, more is better, and if it doesn't look good, add some more.
Absolutely.
Now the fabric potpourri can be freestanding. This is a tie-on belt with grosgrain ribbon or satin ribbon added to the sides, but a nice section about 3 inches wide with fibers, trims, and then the buttons and adornments have been hand sewn on after the fact. You'll never throw away anything again, so you might have to buy some more containers.
Well, that would be a good idea, because you would want a little container by your machine, and any piece of thread or ribbon or piece of fiber that is brightly colored, you will want to put in that bowl. This would be a time that you would save all kinds of scraps, and if you were using a rotary cutter, of course that would be very fast. Guard against cutting your fibers too tiny, because we're going to be reclaiming these by stitching them back again. So you don't want them to be too tiny. And another thing is, if your fabrics have a real milky side on the back, that's something that will kind of make the color look a little less than vibrant.
So make sure the fabric is penetrated through all both right and wrong side. Now there's the key element to reclaim the fabric, and that is a stabilizer, a water-soluble stabilizer that has a sticky surface. And Vicki, you have the example, and you're going to cut a length that you need and double the width, twice the width.
Because we're going to sandwich all of this potpourri in between those two layers. So we will expose one side and start placing all of this stuff onto that sticky side and smooth it out until you have a good coverage. You can let some of it stick out on the side if you want, because that gives some real cute edges and some real neat raw edges. And then once you are pleased with the coverage that you have, peel the rest away, fold in half, and then you have a sandwich that you're ready to stitch. Now this is a time that you can really feel virtuous about using up all of those bits and pieces, the bobbins that are almost half empty and the things that you'll never use again, and some of those threads that maybe wouldn't even be appropriate for stitching a garment. You can practice your stippling if you want to do free hand stitching. You can use your walking foot if that's what you want to do. And there are no rules here for sure, so do not mark here. That would be such a waste of time. But what we're going to do is do a lot of monotonous stitching back and forth, because it's almost like patching. We're reweaving all of this fabric together with our thread.
The patching never looked this good.
Oh, well, this is certainly a texturized idea of patching, but you could use it as a patch if you wanted.
While Vicky's finishing sewing, I'll show you how dense the stitching has to be. You can see that's 1/8 of an inch, maybe apart. You can see just different thread in the bobbin, and from the top thread then, hot water. Immerse this into hot water and let it become saturated and fill and until this dissolves. It's usually a cornstarch base, so it will dissolve, and then this is what you have. It's a wonderful piece of fabric and texture that can be added to collars, cuffs, shoes, and headbands. Quilts do more than keep us warm. They can change hearts and teach life lessons. Judith Meeker joins us today via Skype to tell us about her organization, More Than Warmth. Welcome, Judith.
Hi, Nancy.
You have a fascinating story about how you incorporate children, quilts, and sending warmth across the countries. Tell us about More Than Warmth.
Well, More Than Warmth happened in my classroom after September 11th. I had heard stories about children freezing to death in Afghanistan. And meanwhile, there's some anti-Muslim sentiment in the children. I was teaching reading and language arts to 100 fourth graders. And I asked them, when I heard that children were freezing in Afghanistan, if, you know, in the winters, cold winters and 20 years of war, I asked the children if they would make them a quilt, and they said yes. So we started making muslin squares at our Christmas party, of drawing on them with fabric markers. And I asked the children to open their hearts and draw them a picture, something that would make them happy. We decided they needed to be pictures that were nonviolent, non-political, and non-religious. And that's how we started. We just started making 12 quilts. And pretty soon, about 500 children in our school joined our efforts. Kindergarten made quilts when they studied Q, and they wanted to give them away. And we've made quilts for up to 50 countries now.
It's really a fascinating story how you started with your classroom in Nashville, and you're in a language class, but you're working with textiles, and it's really encouraging to see some of the photos of the people who have received these quilts, smiling faces.
Well, within 6 weeks, our quilts were there, and we sent letters. Since I was a language teacher, we followed their curriculum. We wrote letters. We ended up doing interviews with the newspapers, and the children wrote their own newspaper articles about what they were doing. And our quilts arrived in Afghanistan within 6 weeks. They were delivered to, first of all, they were at a Kabul University. They were exhibited as art exhibits, and then they were given away to hospitals, orphanages, children on the street, victims of war. And that, of course, encouraged more people to want to do more of this. And we kept expanding to different countries that were in need in various ways, and schools and hospitals and orphanages around the world.
Now we have some pictures of other children receiving from different countries. You mentioned some of the countries that you work with and how these quilts are hand carried. Tell our viewers about that.
Well, a lot of this is just connections. Friends will say, oh, I know somebody going to Afghanistan. I connected with Free the Slaves after reading Kevin Vale's book, Disposable People, and they asked me to start delivering quilts to children in India that were slave survivors. So we've been doing that for about 10 years. Just people we meet and connect with. A friend of my husband goes to Haiti and works in an orphanage.
Yes.
So he asked for 90 quilts. So, you know, we keep making them. Various stories. So we've sent them to China. We've sent them to Tibet with midwives teaching local ladies for safe birth. So we've been just sort of a back pocket operation and continue to grow.
You have 3 charming quilts in the background. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, the one on the far background, that's powder blue, was just sent to me recently from a local library. They made quilts and they wanted to support the effort, and the librarian actually sewed the whole quilt up. The purple quilt, it was made in my school in the special ed class, and it's a mural quilt. It's one large piece, and the teacher helped the kids draw their hands, and so they participated in a giving campaign of kindness. And the one behind me actually was made in Thailand. A friend of mine went to Thailand, wanted to take quilts, help make them, and brought quilt squares, a kit, and had the children making squares. And so that one was actually made in Thailand and brought back, and we sewed it up, and we'll deliver it to another country.
How one idea sparked. You've really done a miraculous job of combining language, textiles, giving, breaking down barriers. Kudos to you, Judith, and all your students. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I couldn't do it really with the help of many friends and people working
Sure.
together to do this.
Many hands make light of work, right?
Right.
Thanks
That's right.
again, Judith. If you, our viewers, would like to learn more about More Than Warmth, you can go to nancyzieman.com, where you'll find all things Sewing with Nancy, our show, Nancy's Corner, and then click on the More Than Warmth, and you can read more about Judith's wonderful program. This concludes our two-part series on embellishing outside the box. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.
Nancy and Vicki Tracy have written a fully illustrated book entitled Embellish Outside the Box that includes all the information from this two-part series. It's $14.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2616. Order item number BK2616, Embellish Outside the Box. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at nancyzieman.com to see additional episodes, Nancy's blog, and more. Sewing with Nancy, celebrating 30 years of sewing and quilting with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Oliso. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.